Yo, Umi here. Today I'd like to talk about Lightning Spear Rake Bloodmage, about my experience, what I learned, what the build is, all that stuff. So there's going to be a gameplay on the background. Not going to be any bosses because I just forgot to record any because I decided to make this video after I've killed most of the bosses. I killed both arbiters. I mean, not both arbiters. The arbiter. It wasn't. It was not easy, but the build performed really well. So bossing wise, this is probably one of the better builds. But we'll get to that later. So current PoE Ninja characters in the description. Use the time bar to get to the parts. So topics in this video would be what the build is about, strengths and weaknesses, the techs, and the summary. So it's going to be a pretty quick one. So this build is basically a bleed blood mage with blood barbs. The pretty classic one. You stack elemental flat damage. You use Tangle Tongue to crit. You have 1,000 crit multi. You just run around. You throw spears. They split. You get frenzy charges to split more spears. You have a pretty active gameplay when it comes to, well, not active, but like a lot of effort in gameplay when it's still single target, where you double war cry, you rake into the enemy after walking back a certain distance because you have both momentum and the scaling from distance with rake itself. And then you disengage for shock from leaping slam, and then you just run around, throw some spears to regain flasks through the flask node on blood mage. And then if the boss doesn't die in one rake, which you usually can predict, or at least see ahead of the time. So while they're bleeding, you can swap the gems for inexorable and a pinpoint, and you just keep doing like doing the same rotation. And yeah, so to the strengths, it has Giga Clear, which multiplies heavily with any improvement to clear. So like whether it's Palm of the Creamer, whether it's chain clear with poison from Herald of Blood, any pierce, any fork, anything like that, it multiplies really well because the base of lightning spear is so strong. Range, it's just range. You're ranged, and even though you go into melee, you stay there for so little time that you can basically just off screen things. Well, not say off screen, but like stay on a safe distance. And speaking of safety, you have really good uptime because you're mostly pure damage, pure dot damage. And I think Blood Mage is probably the only ascendancy that can allow you to go full bleed damage without having like 70% of hit damage and 30% of dot damage. It's basically pure dot damage. So because of that, you inflict like bleeding on bosses for like 6 seconds, and you just run around in that time. Same goes for mobs, where you just throw a spear and you just run past them in the perpendicular trajectory. It has a very satisfying like scaling curve where every upgrade feels very impactful no matter what stage you're at. Especially if you pick your upgrades well. And this build also rewards good play because its efficiency kind of significantly depends on how well you play, how well you aim, how well you position, how well you do your combos, how quickly you swap the gems for non full one shot bosses on Rake. That's about for strengths, I think. It has way more weaknesses, which is we'll get to it later, but that's why it's a B tier build. So it's heavily reliant on full life enemies to deal damage because a lot of the nodes for full life are taken, especially the ambush gem, so that you can crit guaranteed against full life enemies, and you gain a lot of damage for full life, specifically from the first approach nodes. And because you clear it only on full life enemies, the magnitude of if you look at the ailments, which has insane synergy with crit multi, that's why the scaling is so exponential. It's basically if the enemy's not full life, you don't deal damage unless you crit, and even then your crits are far weaker. Delirium is another weakness because it has no corpses, so you can't generate frenzy charges, and you don't explode. And it's fine in maps, but specifically Simulacrum, just like in PoE1, is basically the bane of all bleed builds. What can you do? Um, it has unintuitive defenses and sustain, mostly because you don't have a life flasks due to the changes um, of Blood Mage's life flask mod. I mean, you still have life flask, but using it doesn't do anything. And you can go for the unique one, which gives you like recoup and rage when hit, which I think is better non-single target damage wise, just like general utility, just all around it. But I'm not using it. I don't remember what it's called, but I think you'll find it if you're interested in what I'm talking about. Um, it has very like a lot of layers. Like you have evasion, you have deflection, you have ES that recharges with ghost shrouds, you have wind dancer that pushes enemies away, right? And you have insane recovery with remnants, and you have leech and wind dancer. But if you get hit with fizz specifically, like there's this one breach mob that does this like barrage of hits, you always die to it. If you stand in front of it, you just always die. So you always die to like fizz spells, but everything else you are kind of fine with. Even dots, like even without charms, the dots are fine, basically because of your uh, overflow and remnants. So yeah, it's a deceptively tanky build that has very serious weaknesses against specifically hard hits that get past evasion and deflection, and especially when you don't have ghost shrouds. Yeah, it requires heavy role playing and management in single target scenarios. So it's not like you just click a button and you do stuff. It's similar to snipe, except you don't have to stand still. And you also have to swap gems if you don't one shot the boss, like I said 2 times before that. So it might take additional APM and being like able to like multitask and stuff. And it's especially apparent with how sometimes when you rake into a boss and they attack you, most of the time they attack you before you attack them. So they trigger your Wind Dancer, cancel your rake, and since Wind Dancer can apply bleed damage, you still end up removing them from the state of full life. So Rake doesn't proc it, and you have to like swap into the setup and deal less damage. So it's annoying, which is why like picking your timings is very important, which goes back to the skill floor of the build, but still a lot of effort and role playing. Um, Another weakness is that it's behind the good builds in regards to scaling curve. So even though it has exponential scaling curve, you can imagine it as like ADC versus a mage in League of Legends, where you're the ADC. And if you want to play like a build that scales really well early on, this is not the one. It's a build that has like very, again, satisfying scaling curve with significant upgrades, but for the most part, it's behind. And another thing that I'll mention later is that there are builds that are far better than that. So there's not much reason to play it if you are looking for power. It suffers from heavy targeting issues a lot as well, because I don't know what's up, but PoE2 has like really really bad like name locking and other targeting stuff. And since you have lightning spear, which is a projectile that doesn't travel all that fast in my opinion, and you kind of have to hit enemies with that. You sometimes like throw the spear in fucking Narnia and you don't hit what you want, and don't start near Rake, where sometimes the game thinks you want to move 2 meters, and sometimes you fly across the whole screen to that one white mob. It's very a snipey feeling, I would say, but probably even worse. So, if you learn how to use it, it's not gonna be a problem, but it's really conditional and unpleasant. That's about strengths and weaknesses. So the techs, it's like special things that make the build better, and not all of those things are used or understood, which is probably the most important part for like blood mages that play. So one of the biggest things is that most blood mages with this build use crit supports for blood hunt, but since 0.4, it cannot crit because it causes life loss, and that cannot crit or scale damage. So you mostly want to use utilities such as like rapid attacks, calling, strike, even behead, even though it rarely procs, because again, life loss is not something that you deal damage with, so it doesn't count towards behead. Maybe it's a bug, I don't know, but the only times it actually works is when I'm culling the enemy, not necessarily exploding. So how it works is that, let's say, if the enemy is at 20% life and they have 80% blood loss, it will instantly kill them, specifically with Blood Hunt's life loss. But if they have like 22%, then the culling will finish them off. Then you'll get their modifiers. It's very inconsistent. I just do it because there's nothing else to use, and it's just like free lesser orb. So whatever. Sometimes I get Shroud Walker, I get teleported behind. I hate my life, but whatever. So another thing that I again mentioned, pinpoint and inexorable in my spear throw so that I can swap with Rake. You can't really put it closer, so you still have like 2 bars of a gap that you have to like travel with your cursor. But if you get used to it and practice, you probably can do it like 1 or 2 seconds, so pretty quickly. I mean, yeah, it's again an additional uptime, but it's really good. Elemental Conflicts is often used. It's pretty bait. It's 15% more damage on average. 15% more damage on average. And depends on types of flat damages you have. So it can be worse on average if you have like a lot of, let's say, cold and fire, but very little lightning. So yeah, and it also takes like 100 spirit, and there are better usages of your spirit, such as what was the rage thing that generates rage in general is just good, and Trinity, which I'll talk about soon. Disengage plus Leaping Shock, it's a pretty default tech now on this build, but not all of them, not all of the players use it. So it's basically just free shock, better than your Lightning Spear, and it's consistent because you can make it crit with 100%. Again, pinpoint, inexorable, and then shocking leap. I don't use the increased effect, but reverse shock because basically made it dangerous and didn't give that much value in my opinion because we already have the enemies take more damage, like the enemy seekers take more damage in helmet. At least I use that. So the more of those modifiers you have, the less value you get from additional damage taken modifiers on enemies. Pierce's Biss for Lightning Spear, like there's no discussion about it. It's just the best, specifically Pierce 3. Like it's just amazing, especially with the quality on Lightning Spear. It's just like 7 mini spears that deal 70% damage. They just fly into the oblivion. The problem with that is that sometimes you off-screen enemies and you remove them from the state of full life, but they barely take any damage because there's giga penalty, like 20% less damage for each time it pierced. So that's one of the pleasant parts. Again, it ties back into the full life thing. Fork and Ricochet are worse. Fork has less coverage, even though it doesn't have the problem with the full life thing. And Ricochet is just, it used to be the best, but after the rework, it's just not it. Trinity, it's probably the best like damage reservation skill that you can have if you have the proper setup, because it's really good in non one shot boss scenarios. Because what you usually do, right, is war cry, Rake disengage, throw spear, throw spear, throw spear, throw spear. And when you do that, what you can can end up happening is that you throw spears to get the remnants as well. So you keep doing that, you get full Trinity, you war cry, you Rake and disengage, and it can make you deal more damage than you usually would have. But it works only if you're weak or if the boss is really tough, which is a rare case scenario, which you still gonna have to be prepared for when it comes to swapping. But it also requires, like again, a specific balance for flat damage, just like the problem that Elemental Conflicts suffers from. So I tried to use it before. I didn't have the proper balance, but now that I've got more cold damage, it can actually proc. The problem is that I would need to drop either Ghost Dance or Wind Dance, and also get a little bit more spirit. It's probably worth it, but I prefer the more defensive approach, and my damage is probably fine most of the time, unless I'm like in delirium. Then, but yeah, that's beside the point. Resonance for ranging charges from armor break. on Herald of Blood to make Lightning Spear Gigafork. It's the innate property of Lightning Spear. Um, it's not necessary, and you can go for more damage on your Herald of Blood. But when you proc it, it's really good. The problem is that if you have too much damage, your hits kill enemies before you apply bleed, so it doesn't always work. But doing all mass of delirium kind of solves it. But then sometimes you kind of have to nerf your damage on lightning spear, like take movement speed, like action speed on tree on like weapon sets. So yeah, it's a bit clunky. Runeforged Tangle Tongue, I see most blood mages using like corrupted Tangle Tongues. I wouldn't recommend the how's it called? The Runeforged Tangle Tongue is just better, like more attack speed, a little bit more flat, +2 flat crit chance. So you take a high roll Tangle Tongue, you transform it, get your socket, you're happy. That's it. There's no fuckery with it being corrupted, having no socket, having no quality. It's just really good, even though it costs like what 5 divines to do it right now. Because at the start of the league, it costs like 1 or 2 divines, but now it's skyrocketed a lot because people have found really good uniques. But that's beside the point. Blind Leech and CDR with Magnified Area and Wind Dancer. It's really good. You get knocked down or you're just surrounded. It knocks them back, it blinds them, it leeches. And with CDR, it comes back really often. And then the last tech is Herald of Blood plus Bursting Plague. It's a pretty common tech that a lot of Fizz builds use. You don't have to like actually be bleed. So I tried both this and the crit version plus AoE that most people use on PoE Ninja in like previous leagues, even now. And I realized that the chain one is far better. Sure, it deals less damage and you don't explode the rares as well, but the chain clear is far better. If you prefer having less chain, like just not having chain clear, but at the same time being able to just like pop the rares with the blue or even white monsters, then go for it. So onto the summary. This build is a B tier, like I said before. I wouldn't recommend it unless you really like the playstyle, because like builds like Lightning Spear, Deadeye, or Amazon are just better, less gear dependent, and are not fucked by like delirium and stuff like that, like full life crit, and can actually go really influential lineage supports like the Rakiatis flow. And I don't remember what Rakiatis flow is. I think it's like reverse, right? Resistances or like ignore. Basically, you can go ignore resistances and the bifurcate and then go a rare spear. So it has like way more like scaling vectors and yeah, it's also like a black hole for currency, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because it is again very satisfying exponential scaling due to having 1,000 crit multi, but it's very gear dependent. And yeah, if you want good value faster, do another build. It has high highs and low lows. It's similar to Bleed Bow in PoE1, where if you're strong and you're ahead of the curve, you're really having fun, and if you're behind, it's like, oh, fuck off. It's like you feel that there's something there, but it's like you don't really feel good about it. So beware. Um, it's off meta, so prices are lower most of the time for most of your stuff. And Tangle Tongue specifically is not that used in this league. So instead of costing like 4 divines at max roll, it's only 1 divine at the moment, right? And then you add the fact that uh there are like runes that barely anyone uses because of bleeding, and there are some jewels that nobody cares about, especially the rubies and the emeralds. Because ideally you want sapphires, but you can find competitive rubies and emeralds for bleeding specifically, like ailments, bleeding, attack damage, spear damage that nobody else wants because they don't have like attack speed or something like that. So it's giga cheap. And in general, the fact that the Bloodmage is the only ascendancy that can make bleed builds actually work, like actual bleed builds, not the fake ones that have a cosmetic like cherry jam on top of them, and then at the same time also like not being all that great, it's kind of a sign that bleed is like not okay, and it really needs help. And poison is far better off, I believe, and ignite kind of the same. and the uniques that they're adding for bleed with ignite and stuff, it just doesn't address the problem that bleed has. Like converting your bleed damage to fire and like the scale, it just doesn't do anything because bleed is just, it just sucks by default compared to other ailments. And yeah, it's just a sad thing. So yeah, that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll answer them, whether it's about build or like anything else, like how I farm currency. You know, yeah, I'm not planning to stay on this build for long. So there's not gonna be a follow-up video. I'm planning to play another build. I'll probably, like, if I end up playing it, I'll release a video about it as well. So keep an eye out. Um, yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye.